Chapter 1. The House. In 2019, Brendan and Christine Banfield left Long Island, New York, and moved to Herndon, Virginia, roughly 11 months after the birth of their daughter. The move marked an upward shift. Christine Banfield was a trained nurse and a graduate of Quinnipiac University. She had built a career in intensive care, worked as a sexual assault nurse examiner at a family violence and rape crisis center on Long Island, and held supervisory roles within a domestic violence program. Before relocating, she secured a position in Northern Virginia as an ICU and pediatric nurse. Brendan Banfield had joined the Internal Revenue Service in 2009. He was already an IRS employee while living in New York. Prior to the move, he secured his position in Northern Virginia and later transitioned into the agency's Criminal Investigation Division as a special agent. While still in New York, the couple operated a private business together. For approximately 3 years, they co-owned and ran a children's math tutoring center in Magalhaes. Before relocating, they sold the business, knowing it could not be managed from another state. In Virginia, they purchased a large home on a quiet cul-de-sac in Herndon. The house was meant to support the next stage of their lives: career growth, stability, and raising their daughter. To acquaintances, they appeared organized and tightly bonded, a professional couple building something stable. By 2021, their daughter was 4 years old. Both parents worked demanding schedules. Christine's pediatric ICU role required long hours and emotional resilience. Brendan's federal work involved irregular hours and sustained pressure. With no extended family nearby, childcare became a practical concern. They hired a live-in au pair. Her name was Juliana Magalhaes. She moved into the house. From the outside, nothing appeared unusual. The Banfield home blended into the neighborhood, orderly, quiet, predictable. Inside, the structure held, and for a time, it worked. Chapter 2. The Shift. Juliana moved into the Banfield home and became part of its daily rhythm. She handled routines. She was present in the hours that didn't stand out. The house ran smoothly, almost automatically. That was the point. Over time, familiarity set in. Brendan and Juliana crossed paths often. Conversations that started as small talk became regular. Nothing dramatic, nothing that felt like a turning point while it was happening. Just repetition. Shared space creates intimacy even when no one intends it to. Christine remained focused on her responsibilities. The household still functioned. From the outside, nothing suggested change. Inside, boundaries softened quietly. Private conversations developed. Messages replaced chance encounters. Time was managed carefully, not urgently. The relationship didn't begin with a decision. It formed through convenience, proximity, and silence. The kind that doesn't register as danger until it already exists. There is no public record of confrontation. Whether Christine noticed distance or trusted the structure she had built remains unknown. What is clear is that the relationship between Brendan and Juliana shifted from functional to personal. And while that shift took place inside the house, Juliana's life outside it didn't disappear. Before Virginia, before the au pair placement, she had already formed a connection with someone else. That unresolved thread would not stay distant. Chapter 3. The Other Thread. Before she ever moved into the Banfield home, Juliana had already built a connection with someone in the United States. His name was Joseph Ryan. Joseph was 39 years old and lived in Springfield, Virginia, not far from Herndon. He wasn't part of the Banfield's world. He didn't know Brendan. He didn't know Christine. His connection was to Juliana alone. They met online before she entered the au pair program. An au pair placement is structured. Applicants apply through agencies, undergo screening, secure sponsorship, and are matched with host families. It is a cultural exchange program, temporary but formal. It requires planning. During that process, Joseph stayed in contact with her. According to reporting and testimony, he helped her navigate questions about coming to the United States. He encouraged the move. He believed he was part of her future. When Juliana was matched with the Banfields and relocated to Northern Virginia, Joseph remained nearby. Whether they intentionally planned to live close to one another is not publicly established. What is known is that he lived in Springfield, within driving distance of the house where she now worked and lived. Distance was no longer theoretical. Their communication continued after she arrived. To Joseph, the relationship had weight. His family would later describe him as trusting, kind, someone who cared for animals and for his grandmother. They rejected later portrayals of him as violent or predatory. They said he believed what people told him. As months passed, Joseph began pressing for clarity. He knew she was in Virginia. He knew where she lived. He knew the distance between them had disappeared. What he didn't know was that inside the house where she now lived, something else had already begun. The overlap created tension. Juliana was living two parallel realities, one inside the Banfield home and one outside it. Joseph wanted acknowledgement. He wanted to know where he stood. And by simply refusing to fade away, he became part of a situation that depended on silence. Chapter 4. The Line. By this point, the affair inside the Banfield home had lasted months. It wasn't impulsive anymore. It wasn't fragile. It had settled into routine. Schedules adjusted around it. Privacy was managed. Silence became habit. What began quietly now required maintenance. Joseph's presence narrowed the space between past and present. The overlap was no longer abstract. It was immediate, inconvenient. Nothing dramatic had happened. No confrontation, no threats, no scene. But proximity changed risk. For Brendan, the situation stopped being emotional and became structural. Exposure was no longer theoretical. The variables were no longer distant. An affair could remain hidden if it stayed contained. But containment depends on predictability. And unpredictability introduces consequences. Walking away would not reset the marriage. Too much had shifted. Ending things cleanly would invite questions neither of them were prepared to answer. So the internal conversation changed. Not about feelings, about outcomes. What would happen if the truth surfaced? What would follow? Who would lose what? The house that once represented stability now represented leverage, privacy, control, a setting where narratives could be shaped before anyone else had access to them. At this stage, no action had been taken, but the thinking had crossed a boundary. When two people begin discussing solutions instead of consequences, the future narrows. And inside that narrowing space, the line between avoidance and intention grows thin. Chapter 5. The Night. On Friday, February 24th, 2023, in the early morning hours, Brendan left his house and drove to a nearby McDonald's. He ordered food and waited. Not long after he pulled away, Joseph Ryan arrived at the front door. He knocked. Juliana answered. She spoke to him briefly, stepped aside, and let him in. Instead of leaving him downstairs, she turned and walked ahead of him, leading the way toward the stairs. Ryan followed her up to the second floor. In the bedroom, Christine was waiting. Her phone was no longer on her. It had been placed inside a drawer. Downstairs, Juliana moved through the house. At some point, she used her phone to call Brendan. Time passed. Brendan returned through the basement where his daughter was. He left her there and turned toward the stairs, moving back up into the house. He went straight to the bedroom. Inside the room were Christine and Joseph. Brendan stepped into the doorway and announced himself as a police officer. Almost immediately, a gunshot tore through the room. Joseph was struck in the head and dropped to the floor. He was wounded, not still, his body moving against the carpet. Christine was attacked in the same room. A knife. A brief struggle. Blood spread across the bedroom floor and nearby surfaces. A phone connected to 911. The call opened, then disconnected. Joseph continued to move. Seconds later, a second gunshot was fired. Another call followed. This time, words were spoken. An intruder. Inside the house. When police arrived, they were led upstairs. 2 adults lay on the bedroom floor. Joseph Ryan was dead at the scene. Christine was taken from the house alive and would later die from her injuries. Downstairs, a 4-year-old child remained physically unharmed. The house fell quiet again, and almost immediately, a version of the night began to settle into place. A break-in, a confrontation, a husband intervening. For a moment, that was the story. Chapter 6. When it didn't add up. For a moment, it looked straightforward. The scene upstairs matched the explanation being given. There had been gunfire. There was blood. There was a call describing an intruder. On the surface, the pieces appeared to align. But as officers remained inside the house and began documenting the details, certain elements required closer attention. The layout of the home, the movement between levels, the timing of the calls. Christine's phone was not found in her hand or on a nearby surface. It had been placed inside a drawer before the violence began. That placement introduced a question. Then came the timeline. Brendan's stop at McDonald's was verified. The duration. The return. Those movements were compared against the time Joseph Ryan arrived at the house and the window during which he was inside. The sequence could be reconstructed with precision. And as it was reconstructed, the simplicity of the initial explanation began to narrow. Not collapse, but tighten. Investigators widened their scope beyond the bedroom and beyond the final minutes. Phone data was pulled, message activity reviewed, device handling examined. In the days leading up to February 24th, prior movements and range practice were added to the larger timeline. None of these details changed what happened upstairs, but they changed how the night was understood. At first glance, it had been a clear story. As the details revealed themselves, the story became harder to hold together without question. Chapter 7. The phones. As investigators reconstructed the timeline, device activity became central to the review. Call logs were obtained, message records were pulled. Connection times were matched against physical movement inside and outside the house. It was later established that Christine's phone had been placed inside a drawer intentionally prior to the attack. That detail mattered. The phone had not been dropped during a struggle. It had not been left behind accidentally. It had been put away before the violence began. For investigators, that raised a practical problem. People generally keep their phones close, especially during moments of uncertainty. In Christine's case, that expectation was even stronger. She worked as a nurse, Her phone was typically accessible, yet in this instance it had been deliberately placed out of reach. The first 911 call was brief and disconnected. A second call followed, reporting an intruder inside the house. The timing between those calls was measured precisely. Device activity was then compared against physical movement, when Brendan left, when Joseph arrived, when calls were made, and when communication stopped. Phones do not explain behavior. They document sequence. And once the digital record was laid over the events of the night, the timeline became less flexible. Chapter 8. The Stand. When the trial began, the focus shifted from what happened inside the bedroom to what happened before it. Brendan testified. He denied planning anything. He told the jury he was at a nearby McDonald's that morning when he received a call from Juliana. According to him, she said there was a car at the house she did not recognize and that someone might be inside. He said that is why he drove back. Surveillance footage showed him leaving the McDonald's around 7:37 a.m., speaking on the phone. He testified that he entered the house, went upstairs, announced himself as a police officer, and fired his service weapon because he believed he was confronting an intruder. Then Juliana testified. She confirmed she made the call, but her explanation was different. By the time she took the stand, she had already pleaded guilty to manslaughter. She told the jury the call was not a warning. It was part of a plan. According to her testimony, the scene was meant to look like a home invasion. That put the two of them in direct conflict. The prosecution supported her account with digital evidence, including records showing that the dating application used to contact Joseph Ryan had been accessed from Christine's device. The defense attacked about Juliana's credibility, pointing to her plea agreement and arguing she had reason to shift blame. The prosecution argued that the timing of that morning, the departure from the house, Ryan's arrival, the phone call, and Brendan's return, showed coordination. Two explanations were now on the table. One describing a reaction to a reported threat, the other describing a staged setup. The jury had to decide which account fit the evidence. Chapter 9. The Decision. When testimony concluded, the case narrowed. There were no new witnesses, no new revelations, only two explanations placed side by side. Brendan maintained that he responded to a call reporting a possible intruder and acted in defense of his home. Juliana, having already pleaded guilty to manslaughter, testified that the call was staged and that the events that followed were planned. The jury was left to weigh credibility against record. Digital evidence had established sequence. Surveillance had established movement. The phone call had established the trigger. The question was not whether violence occurred. The question was whether that violence began in panic or in preparation. In cases like this, intention is rarely proven by confession. It is inferred from structure, and structure is revealed in choices. The jury retired to deliberate. Chapter 10. The Verdict. The jury found Brendan Banfield guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Juliana Magalhaes, who pleaded guilty to manslaughter and testified that the call was staged, was sentenced to 10 years. The defense claim of a home invasion was rejected. The court ruled the killings were planned. A man can hold authority and still fail privately. He can manage appearances and still lose control of himself. When secrecy becomes normal and boundaries weaken, the damage does not stay contained. Reputation cannot protect a man who refuses discipline. Career cannot compensate for compromised character. When a man abandons restraint, consequences do not hesitate. 4 lives were directly shattered. 2 ended. 2 confined. Families on both sides will carry this permanently. But the deepest fracture belongs to the child. A daughter growing up without her mother, without her father, without the stability that should have anchored her life. 2 sentences were handed down. The verdict closed the legal case. The damage will continue long after the courtroom emptied. If this case speaks to you, watch the rest of the 3R content, where discipline, character, and self-governance are treated as non-negotiable.